Kansas State, Big 12 title contender. Yes, I fully believe that. I'll tell you how they do that in a moment. But first, the Big 12 title race is something that at times I love more than life itself, because the way that it gives you this unpredictable nature and a vast array of teams from all over the place that could go win it, it's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's poetic at times. And you know what? I'm here for it as long as they want to have the conference set up like this. So, Kansas State, going into next year, brings back Avery Johnson. And that's a pretty important factor when you return a quarterback, because when you look around college football next year, this was not a great class of quarterbacks that are being sent off to the NFL draft. There were plenty of good players. Of course, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, those sorts of guys. But the number of returning highly productive quarterbacks in college football, few and far between. You can find quite a few in the good old Big 12. Guys like Jake Retzlaff. Guys like, you're going to put Sawyer Robertson in there at Baylor? Sure. That's coming on tomorrow's show, not later today, but more on that later. Arizona State, Sam Leavitt, he was really good. Texas Tech, Baron Morton, well, he's crazy talented. So once again, for the second straight year, if you're going to win this conference, you have to have more than just average or slightly above average quarterback play. Who made the Big 12 championship game this past season? Who was it? Oh, that's right. Iowa State, Arizona State. You had Sam Leavitt in there, who was one of PFF's 2 or 3 highest graded quarterbacks for the entire season last year. He did that under the radar because Cam Scadaboo deservedly got a bunch of attention and Heisman hype. But Sam Leavitt was really good. Really, really good. Lost his best receiver going into that Big 12 title game, who was on fire. It didn't matter. Did not matter. So he was really good. Now, Avery Johnson doesn't have to become that level of passer because he brings a dynamic element on the ground that most quarterbacks can't even dream of being able to accomplish. That's what makes him special. His ability to run is unique in this conference and in a lot of conferences. He is Lamar Jackson light. However, he has to get better. You are not going to give yourself the best chance to go and be a Big 12 title contender if you don't have the ability to make big throws. And what I felt was missing from Kansas State's offense this past season was a reliability on third down for Avery Johnson to deliver when you know the ball's going up in the air. If you can rush with discipline as defensive coordinator, you can do a lot against this Kansas State offense. Because if Avery Johnson can't break contain, he wasn't that dangerous. Now, this past year, he threw for about 2,700 yards, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. I'd like to see him cut down on the second number, yes. 58% though. Now, that doesn't sound like a big number. That's because it's not. I expect him to take a step forward in his second full season as a starter. But then I thought about, well, what did the other Big 12 quarterbacks do? How far away is he really? Now, Rocco Becht was only about 1% better completion-wise in 2024, but was a more productive quarterback from a yardage standpoint. He threw for over 3,500 yards. So Avery Johnson is not completing a high clip, and he's also not having a bunch of downfield shots, or that is not something that Kansas State really wants to do. But still, that step forward needs to be there for Kansas State. And if they have that, guess what? I've seen Chris Kleiman win this conference before. That's when Texas was still in it. Remember when Texas and Oklahoma were members of the Big 12? Huh. Those were great times. Great times indeed. A special, rightful time, might I add. But if Avery Johnson takes just a step, it doesn't have to be a huge, monumental gap not gap. If he doesn't have to take a monumental leap forward for Kansas State to be right there and capable of just going out winning the Big 12. FanDuel's got their odds as tied for the best with Arizona State, largely because, I believe, of Avery Johnson being there. Returning quarterback production, that's essential. You got to have a good head coach. And how does your schedule look? Well, the front half for Kansas State, pretty darn favorable after their first game. That matchup in Dublin. I don't know why it's being played in Dublin, Ireland. It's the Aer Lingus Football Classic. Okay, all right. August 23rd can't get here soon enough. Kansas State, Iowa State. Huge, wide-ranging implications in that college football game. Phenomenal early season matchup, conference game that early in the year. Don't see that very often, but alas, there we will be on August 23rd. So, Kansas State, Iowa State start off there. That's a tough matchup, but it's easier than going to Ames because both teams are going to Dublin, and we'll see what happens. But then there is a stretch where Kansas State should expect to win every single game. They should have a W5. They should. North Dakota, Army at home. Don't you dare overlook the Knights, Kansas State. I will not stand for that. At Arizona, who, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not that high on them. UCF, first-year head coach Scott Frost at home. Yeah, that should be fine. Then at Baylor. Now, Baylor got hot at the end of last season. Was going to talk about Baylor on today's show. A little scheduling conflict popped up. We bumped that segment to tomorrow. Stick around if you want to hear about how I feel about the Bears and how Cam Stewart of Locked On Baylor feels about them as well. That could be difficult. Game is in Waco. Then you come back home against TCU. You go at Kansas looking for a bounce back. Then the gauntlet arrives. That entire stretch after the Iowa State game is so manageable. It's so workable. And last year, 7-2 got you into the Big 12 championship game with the right tiebreakers in there. It's so workable here for Kansas State. Again, if Avery Johnson is the same runner and stays healthy and just takes a baby step forward, if he just completes 63% of his passes instead of 58 and hits 3,000 yards through the air, I think Kansas State finds themselves in the Big 12 championship game in the conference of parity. That's what we're dubbing the Big 12 here. But the gauntlet arrives once November hits. That's when it will be gut check time for Kansas State. Hosting Texas Tech, one of the best rosters in the Big 12. Could be in the Big 12 championship game. At Oklahoma State. Can get crazy. It can get wild at Boone Pickens Stadium. Then at Utah. Ooh, boy. Now, there is a bye in between the Texas Tech and Oklahoma State games, but back-to-back weeks on the road at Oklahoma State, at Utah, come back home against Colorado to round out the regular season. I don't think that's a problem. But those two road games, massive for the Wildcats. You win at least one of those, you're in good shape.